There's a very specific type of silence you pay for when you buy a house in a cul-de-sac. It's not just the absence of noise, it's the sound of safety. It's the sound of knowing your property value is stable and that your biggest problem is supposed to be crabgrass. My wife, Sarah, and I spent 15 years working toward that silence. We bought our forever home in a sleepy suburb just outside of Seattle. We have two kids, a golden retriever named Buster, who is afraid of his own shadow, and a backyard that Sarah spent 3 summers turning into a sanctuary. It was perfect. Now, before I tell you how a single night in December burned that sanctuary to the ground, I have a small favor to ask. If you enjoy stories about justice served cold, or if you've ever had a neighbor who made you question your sanity, please take a second to hit that subscribe button. And if this story reminds you of someone you know, share it with a friend. We're all in this crazy world together, and sometimes sharing a crazy story is the best therapy we've got. Thanks for that. Now, let's get to the wreckage. The trouble started in November. The widow next door, Mrs. Gable, passed away. We were sad to see her go, but we were terrified of who would replace her. I never learned what they actually did for a living. Let's call them Brad and Tiffany. Brad drove a matte black G-Wagon that sounded like a dying tank, and Tiffany treated the mailbox like a runway. They were young, loud, and had that specific brand of entitlement that screams, "The rules don't apply to us because we have followers." At first, it was minor. They left their trash bins out for 4 days. They parked across the sidewalk. Typical annoyances. But then came December 31st. Sarah and I are simple people. Our New Year's Eve tradition involves homemade nachos, a movie, and being asleep by 10:30 p.m. At 4 p.m., a box truck arrived next door, then a catering van, then a flatbed truck carrying what looked like concert-grade speakers. I walked out to the fence. "Hey, Brad," I called out, trying to keep it friendly. "Big night planned?" Brad didn't even look up from his phone. "Yeah, just a few friends. Don't worry about it, Mark." A few friends turned out to be 200 people. By 9 p.m., the bass wasn't just audible, it was physical. The pictures on my living room wall were vibrating crooked. My dog, Buster, was in the bathtub, shaking so hard his teeth were chattering. By 10 p.m., cars were parked on my lawn, not in front of my house, on my grass. I went over there. I had to weave through a crowd of strangers vaping on my driveway just to get to their front door. When Tiffany finally answered, she looked at me like I was the health inspector at a lemonade stand. "Can you please turn it down?" I shouted over the music, "and get these cars off my grass. My kids can't sleep." "It's New Year's, Mark," she sneered, holding a bottle of champagne that probably cost more than my first car. "Stop being such a Kevin. Live a little." Then she slammed the door in my face. I called the non-emergency police line. They said they were swamped with DUI checks and domestic disputes. Noise complaints were bottom of the barrel. "We'll get there when we get there." At 11:59 p.m., the grand finale happened. They didn't just buy fireworks. They bought illegal commercial-grade mortars. They set the launch tubes up on their patio, which faces my backyard. When the clock struck midnight, it sounded like a war zone. I was hugging my kids on the floor of the living room. Then I heard a crash that I will never forget. One of the mortars had tipped over. It fired horizontally straight through my cedar fence and exploded inside my custom-built gazebo. The wood was dry, the fire was instant. I spent the first hour of the new year with a garden hose screaming for help while Brad's guests filmed the fire on their phones laughing. The fire department came and put it out, but the damage was done. My gazebo was ash, the back fence was gone. My wife's prize-winning hydrangea garden was trampled by firefighters. And Brad? He told the police, "It was an accident. The wind blew it over. Mark should have used fire-retardant wood." The next morning, the silence didn't return. The smell of wet ash hung over the neighborhood. I walked over to get their insurance information. Brad met me in the driveway wearing sunglasses to hide his hangover. "Look, Mark," he said, handing me a check for $500. "This covers the deductible or whatever. Let's just move on." The gazebo cost $8,000 to build, I said, my voice shaking. The fence is another $3,000, and you destroyed the landscaping. He laughed. Sue me, bro. You can't prove who knocked the firework over. It was a party. Chaos happens. He tore up the check and threw the confetti pieces at my chest. That was the moment. That was the moment the nice guy Mark died and something darker took his place. They thought because they had money and attitude, they could bully me. They didn't know that before I was a suburban dad, I was a project manager for a commercial construction firm. I know codes, I know permits, and I know how to read a survey map. The war began with psychological operations. They installed motion-activated floodlights aimed directly at my master bedroom window. I responded by installing blackout curtains and buying a drum set for my son. He practiced every day at 7 a.m. They started throwing their dog's waste over the broken fence line into my yard. I installed a 4K camera hidden in a birdhouse. I didn't say a word. I just saved the footage. But I wasn't interested in petty revenge. I wanted them gone. I took a week off work. I went down to the county assessor's office. I pulled the original plat maps for our subdivision dating back to 1985. That's when I found the first crack in their armor. When Mrs. Gable lived there, she had a detached garage built. It looked fine, but looking at the aerial maps and the survey lines, something felt off. Brad and Tiffany had recently started renovations. They were building a massive deck to replace the patio where the fireworks had launched. They were also bragging on social media, which I was now monitoring via a burner account, about turning the house into a content house where other influencers would pay to stay and film. Bingo. I dug deeper. Our neighborhood is zoned R1, residential, strictly single-family homes, no commercial enterprises. Running a hotel or commercial filming location was a massive violation of city ordinances. But I needed the kill shot. I hired a licensed surveyor. It cost me $1,500, but I viewed it as an investment. On a Tuesday morning, while Brad and Tiffany were sleeping off another party, the surveyor and I walked the property line. He set up his tripod and laser equipment. He worked quietly for an hour. Then he called me over. He had a weird look on his face. "Mark," he said, pointing to the neon orange stake he just drove into the ground. "You see this?" "Yeah, that's the corner of the lot," I said. "No," he shook his head. "That's the corner of their lot. Now look at where their detached garage and their brand new deck are sitting." I looked. The line went right through the middle of their garage. And the new deck? It was entirely on my property. Not just a few inches, 3 feet. Mrs. Gable had built her garage over the line 20 years ago, and nobody noticed because the fence was in the wrong place. Brad and Tiffany had assumed the old fence line was the property line. "What does this mean?" I asked, though I already knew. The surveyor smiled. "It means roughly 40% of their garage and 100% of their new deck is technically on your land. Legally, you own that structure." I didn't run over there screaming. I waited. I waited until they finished the deck. It was beautiful. Mahogany, glass railings, a built-in fire pit. They must have spent $30,000 on it. Once the final coat of varnish was dry, I made my move. But not to them. I went to City Hall. I presented my evidence. The surveyor's official report proving encroachment, the videos of the commercial parties and the content house advertisement proving illegal commercial zoning usage, the footage of them dumping hazardous waste, dog poop and chemicals, onto my property. The city planner, a guy named Steve who hates paperwork but hates zoning violators even more, looked at my file. His eyebrows went up. "They built a deck without a permit?" Steve asked. "It appears so," I said. "And they're crossing the property line? By 3 feet? And running a business? Here are the Instagram receipts." Steve picked up his stamp. "I'm gonna make a site visit." 2 days later, 3 city vehicles pulled up. Steve was there along with a code enforcement officer and, crucially, a building inspector. Brad came out in his bathrobe holding a coffee. "Can I help you guys? You're blocking my G-Wagon." "Are you the owner?" Steve asked. "Yeah, who's asking?" "The city. We're issuing a stop work order immediately, and we have some citations." I watched from my kitchen window, sipping tea. It was better than any movie. They walked Brad to the property line. I saw Steve point to the orange stake. I saw Brad shake his head. I saw Brad wave his arms. Then I saw the surveyor pull out the maps. Brad turned purple. He looked at my house. He saw me in the window. I raised my mug. The fallout. The encroachment. The city ruled that the garage and the deck were illegal structures. Because the garage crossed property lines, it couldn't be grandfathered in because it violated fire setback codes. The deck was ordered to be demolished immediately at the owner's expense. The business, they were slapped with a cease and desist for running an unlicensed business in a residential zone. The fine was $500 per day that the advertisements remained online. The lawsuit. This was my coup de grace. I sued them for the destruction of my gazebo, the fence, the emotional distress, and here's the kicker, the cost of removing the encroachments from my land. We ended up in civil court. Brad and Tiffany tried to represent themselves because lawyers are a scam. The judge, a stern woman who clearly did not have a TikTok account, looked at the photos of my burned gazebo. She looked at the survey. She looked at the video of Tiffany calling me a Kevin. "Mr. Defendant," the judge said, "did you build this deck on the plaintiff's land?" "I mean, the fence was there," Brad argued. "It's adverse possession or something." "Adverse possession takes 20 years of open hostility," the judge corrected. "You've lived there for 4 months. You failed to get a survey. You failed to get a permit. You failed to be a decent neighbor." The verdict? They were ordered to pay me $25,000 for the damages to my property. They were ordered to pay for the demolition of the deck, $8,000, and the city condemned their garage until they paid to have the 3 feet shaved off and the wall rebuilt, a construction nightmare that would cost them another $40,000. But the financial hit wasn't what destroyed them. It was the content house. Because of the lawsuit and the zoning violations, their investors pulled out. They had leveraged the house to the hill to pay for the renovations, banking on the income from the influencer parties. Without that income and with the massive legal fees and construction fines, the math didn't work. 3 months after the court date, a new sign appeared on their lawn. For sale, bank owned. They had defaulted. The day they moved out, it was raining. I was outside rebuilding my gazebo, bigger and better this time. Brad was loading the last of his boxes into a U-Haul. The G-Wagon had been repossessed weeks prior. He looked at me. He looked tired. The arrogance was gone. "You know," he said, pausing by the truck, "you could have just been cool about the music." I put down my hammer. I walked to the fence line, the correct surveyed fence line. "Brad," I said calmly, "I was cool. I asked you to turn it down. You told me to live a little." I gestured to my quiet yard, my happy dog, and my safe home. I am living, and now I'm living next to an empty house. He didn't say anything. He just got in the truck and drove away. A lovely older couple named Jim and Barb bought the house a month later. They like gardening, they go to bed at 9 p.m., and last week Jim came over to ask if his wind chimes were bothering me. "Jim," I said, handing him a beer, "I can't even hear them." And that, my friends, is the beautiful sound of silence. So what's the lesson here? It's simple. Be kind to your neighbors, respect boundaries, literally and figuratively, and never ever assume you know where the property line is without a survey. If you enjoyed this suburban justice, please remember to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. And let me know in the comments, what's the worst thing a neighbor has ever done to you? I read every single one. Until next time, stay safe, keep your fences strong, and be good to each other.